Gym Glow. Steven is lamenting the loss of Cookie Cat, his favorite ice cream brand that's no longer in stock. Upon returning to his house to tell the gyms about this, he's immediately attacked by a bunch of monsters. The other gyms don't really seem to mind this, viewing the giant bugs as more of an annoyance than anything else. The conversation even continues on in spite of the battle. This establishes pretty quickly the expertise of the fighters. They are experienced at what they do. After this fight, Steven discovers the freezer is stocked with Cookie Cat, as the other gyms heard it was discontinued and didn't want Steven to go without his favorite treats. While enjoying one, his gym begins to glow, though he fails to manifest his weapon during this short time. Steven gets a short lesson on how to manifest a gym weapon from the others, which doubles as a quick introduction not to the gyms as fighters, but their personalities too. Pearl begins with a speech about flower petals with a hint of chaos theory, along the lines of the petals falling in a seemingly random pattern, but they're actually influenced by gravity, wind, and the like. Amethyst says that summoning a weapon comes naturally, manifesting hers to cause some property damage. And Garnet says they're both right, that he has to train really hard, but also not think at all, to make a weapon appear. This advice doesn't work though, and Steven decides to rely on something more consistent, eating ice cream while having everyone stand exactly where they were before. When this also fails, he grows upset, only for the other gyms to offer him comfort by saying he's still one of them, even if he can't conjure a weapon yet. With this bit of praise, he's finally able to manifest a shield that bounces around the house before destroying his TV. The idea being that Steven didn't manifest his shield because of ice cream, but the thought behind them buying so much ice cream. The centipedal from earlier returns, this one much larger, and the gyms rush outside to defeat it, warning Steven to stay inside as his powers haven't yet manifested and it's too dangerous. But Steven ignores these warnings, wanting to eat some ice cream and save the day. When the gyms are pinned down by acid spit, Steven gets the monster's attention, though eating so much ice cream only manages to give him an upset stomach, not a shield. After his mini-fridge is destroyed, he gets angry and swings at the beast, electrocuting it and making an opportunity for the others to take it out, where it collapses into a smaller gym. Steven's still unsure how to summon his weapon, but he now knows it's not with the discontinued ice cream. Laser Light Cannon. Steven and Amethyst are eating fry bits, the leftover bits of french fries, when they notice a second sun in the sky. Pearl and Garnet are already investigating this, calling it Red Eye and observing that it's getting closer and closer until presumably it will smash into Beach City, Majora's Mask style. They plot out what to do about it, lamenting that Rose-Quartz isn't there because if Steven's mother was, things would be much easier. When they mention the titular laser light cannon she used to own, Steven suggests that they ask his father about it, as he might still have some of his mom's old stuff. But the gyms are hesitant to talk to him, preferring their method of throwing Amethyst over and over. Steven rushes over to Greg's car wash, where he tries to wake his father up by setting off his van's alarm, and a sleepy Greg exits to ask Steven what's up, before noticing the red eye. He takes Steven to a regular, non-magical storage unit, where he may or may not have the laser light cannon kept because it didn't fit in his van, which he also lives in. Steven equips himself to enter and crawls through the maze of junk, fascinated by the various old things his father has, like CDs from a failed musical career as a one-man band and a photo of him and Rose-Quartz. Steven accidentally smashes this photo while crawling over it, but Greg reassures him that if every pork chop were perfect, we wouldn't have hot dogs. Then, Steven finds the cannon. They hook it up to Greg's van and drag it through town as Steven insists on playing Greg's song, Let Me Drive My Van Into Your Heart, for motivation. They arrive to see that the red eye is close enough that it started to affect gravity, pulling the van away as Steven starts trying to activate it. None of the gyms knows how to do this, rubbing Steven's gem on it as he tries various passwords and phrases to no success. Steven thinks he's failed to stop the red eye, but Greg assures him it's all fine, and Steven repeats his phrase about hot dogs, which activates the cannon at last. It begins to fire, and the gyms all chip in to aim it, taking out the eye with a rose-shaped laser beam. Greg tears up at the sight of her before noticing his van is being pulled away by the tide and running over to save it. Through the episode, there's a disparity between the way the gyms speak of Rose-Quartz and the way Greg is both mentioned and portrayed. Rose-Quartz is this almost divine figure, spoken of with reverence as they consider her to be powerful enough to solve any and all of their issues with little effort, to the point where they're even unsure about touching her old stuff. Greg has this old stuff shoved haphazardly into a storage unit, because he doesn't fit it into the van he lives in. He has a failed music career, a failing current career, and overall seems like a relative loser to everybody but Steven, who finds all his old failures not as failures but adventures of their own. It's the fact that he's willing to see the best in people that makes him able to ignore other prejudices and actually talk to those who can save the day, even if he can't save it himself. Cheeseburger Backpack. Tired of feeling like he's too useless to be brought along on missions, Steven orders a cheeseburger backpack to carry extra stuff on the missions the other gyms go on, hoping this will get him invited. The others are about to leave for the Lunar Sea Spire to place the moon goddess statue at its top, which is supposed to prevent this tower from collapsing into the ocean, and Steven convinces them to take him with them, offering to hold the statue in his backpack. He packs kind of randomly, placing random objects like a stuffed toy named Mr. Squeezy inside while throwing out other things like first aid kits. The gyms take the warp pad over where they see that this spire is falling into the ocean. Steven at first has to be rescued, convincing Pearl that he ought to stay behind for his own safety, but the others give him another chance to prove himself, which he does by overcoming a gravitational trap by tying together some sweaters. Amethyst hops across with her whip, praising Steven's solution as they head deeper into the ruined tower. Pearl's horrified by the decay on the inside, remembering it didn't always look so bad, implying they've been here before when things were much better off. They discover this decay is due to crystal shrimp, who have taken over the building, hastening its destruction. She comes up with an elaborate plan to get around them, though Steven simply tosses a couple of sandwiches on the ground that the shrimp go after instead of the group. The next obstacle is a flowing river that's cut off their crossing, but Steven is once again prepared because he packed an inflatable raft, which immediately floats away due to the strong current. Garnet simply knocks over a pillar to make a bridge and they cross, saying that the strategies can't all be winners. So far, all of the obstacles have been navigated with ease by one of the others. Amethyst leaped across the first gap, Pearl strategized through the second, and Garnet made a bridge over the third. Each of the challenges fitting their particular strength so well to the point where there's barely a difficulty at all. The final challenge is to actually place the statue where it belongs, and after digging through his backpack for a while, Steven realizes that this challenge, carrying the thing he said he would, is impossible because he left it at home. He offers the Mr. Squeezy to the pedestal instead, and after a little bit of glowing, it explodes, and the entire tower starts to fall. The four of them emerge from the water, with Steven apologizing for ruining everything, but he's cheered up when they point out that 2 of his 4 ideas were successes. And then the raft floats back up to the surface, making it 75%. Together breakfast. The house is empty, so Steven takes it upon himself to cook breakfast for everybody, making a stack of pancakes with syrup, popcorn, and a single strawberry. He dubs this Together Breakfast, as he wants everyone to eat it together, though he gets tired of waiting for everyone to show up. Garnet comes in holding a cursed scroll and then ignores Steven because she needs to destroy it, as well as his phone because he took a picture of the scroll. Amethyst comes by to tease Steven with the water gun, but she's distracted when Pearl enters, chastising her for having one of Pearl's swords in her room. Not wanting to be left alone, Steven forces his way into Pearl's room, where he sees her placing her swords where they ought to be. He tries to swim Together Breakfast over to her, only to get swept away by the water currents and pulled down, and then upside down because the water does not obey the usual laws of physics. He lands in Amethyst's room, where she's busy de-organizing everything after Pearl cleaned it for her, saying that she had a system to find these things that has been disrupted, upset because the reason she has so much junk in the first place is because Pearl's stuff keeps washing down to her. Amethyst tries to eat Steven's Together Breakfast, but he doesn't want to serve it to her because they're not all present yet, and she chases him through a series of bizarre hallways before ending up in a room with the Crystal Heart. At first, Steven's excited that they have 3 of the 4 of them in one place, but then he begins sliding down one of the blood vessels into darkness, and then a bright pink room, and then more darkness, before he ends up in a room with a pit full of lava where Garnet's preparing to burn the scroll. Steven tries to offer Garnet some Together Breakfast, but this distracts her long enough that the burning scroll escapes its bubble and begins attacking. The gems draw their weapons, but are quickly overpowered as the spirit begins to possess all the organic matter around it, meaning it lunges for Steven's Together Breakfast and starts to grow massive. Once the others are taken out of commission, he's the only one left standing, and Steven pushes his Together Breakfast monster into the lava pit. Once it's gone, the 4 head back to the house to make a new Together Breakfast, better than the first one. But once it's complete, they realize that after the previous fight, it's not very appetizing. Frybo. Pearl is searching for a gem shard capable of turning clothing garments sentient. though Steven doesn't pay attention to her lecture about this shard because he's too busy thinking about his missing pants. He finds the pants wandering around on their own after Pearl leaves, chasing them down and eventually overpowering the jeans, which he then puts on. He finds the gem shard and places it into a sock, realizing he can order it around a bit before leaving to go find Pearl in town. He is stopped by the Frybo character mascot, with PD inside of it, getting chased around by seagulls before exiting as he says he hates his job. This gives Steven the idea to, at first, climb in the suit itself, but then place the gem shard inside so it will dance on its own. They order Frybo to go make people eat french fries as the two boys head into town to kill time. They arrive at the arcade where PD laments that working in the fry suit is not what he wanted because it's a menial job that he hates doing. But the reason he's actually working this job is more so because he wanted to prove to his father, Mr. Fryman, that he was capable of doing it. This didn't have the intended effect though, as Fryman keeps calling his son by the name of the mascot, so he's not even getting what he wanted out of the work, and yet quitting would only make his father resent him even more. Steven doesn't get the time to talk this out with him as they hear screaming coming from nearby, Frybo having grown grotesque limbs as it holds people down and force feeds them fries. One of these people is Mr. Fryman himself, who still believes it's his son inside the costume, as he apologizes for pushing his kid too hard, claiming he only wanted him to be the best Fryman he could. Pearl then intervenes, attempting to take out the fry monster only to get sprayed by ketchup and blinded. So Steven takes over by taking her gem shards and placing them in his own clothing, making an army out of his outfit, and attacks Frybo, holding him down so Steven can pull the shard out from inside. They then take Frybo to the ocean where Mr. Fryman lights the greasy suit on fire in a Viking funeral. He tells his son that he won't be getting a new suit, and will let his son work alongside the rest of the family like normal. And then Pearl tells Steven to put his clothes back on. Cat Fingers. Steven and Greg are having a water fight while cleaning the mayor's re-election mobile. Steven sprays Mayor Dewey with the hose, and Greg offers to comp the wash for him, with Steven justifying this as the opportunity to win political favors. Then they meet Amethyst, shapeshifted into a cat, who sprays them more before showing off her powers a bit. Greg's off-put by magical stuff, so he leaves, and the other two return to the Crystal Temple, where Amethyst offers to teach Steven a bit about how to shapeshift. Pearl warns him about shapeshifting, saying to start small and simple, and Amethyst agrees, trying to get Steven to focus on turning into a cat. Steven sort of succeeds, turning his finger into a tiny cat, and he immediately sets out to show this to everyone he can. First he takes the cat finger to Greg, who's weirded out by it. Then he shows Sadie and Lars at Big Donut, and Lars sarcastically says the cat doesn't have any friends. So Steven conjures more cat fingers, heading to the fry shop, where he asks PD for fry bits. Ronaldo takes a picture of Steven's cat fingers, which now number 10 as they eat, and Steven realizes that he doesn't know how to unmake the cats. He returns to the Crystal Temple where he attempts to ask for help, but the other gyms are on their way to a mission without him, and he can't swim over to join because the cat fingers hate water. So he stays home, trying to focus on remaining not a cat. But this doesn't work as he begins to grow more and more cat heads. Without the gyms for help, Steven runs to Greg, who's still not comfortable around anything magical. Steven asks for help with the two, realizing that the cats hate water and will shrink away if sprayed. Though Greg's hose isn't enough to stop the cats, and he has to turn on the big sprayers inside the car wash. As the steam clears, it's revealed that this worked on the Akira monster, and Steven returns to the dock to greet the gyms with cat puns, as it's clear they underestimated him. Bubble Buddies. The gyms are investigating recent frequent earthquakes while Steven's trying to impress a girl reading on the beach by riding his bike back and forth, though he only manages to fall over and embarrass himself. The other gyms, having watched the whole thing, concur that Steven must have a crush on this girl, and they all offer differing advice, like Pearl treating Steven like a child and trying to set up a playdate, or Garnet saying he needs to just talk to her. But Steven tells him not to throw off his funky flow, and that he's going to try again as long as they promise not to watch. He grabs a glowing bracelet out of the freezer and heads to the beach where he attempts to introduce himself, only for one of these earthquakes to knock a rock loose, with Steven diving in the way and creating a bubble around the both of them. Once safe from these falling rocks, Steven introduces himself as being magical, which Connie doesn't seem too taken aback by, merely comparing Steven to her father, who works as a traveling security guard. Steven then realizes he doesn't know how to get rid of the bubble, and the two are trapped. His plan is to have the duo push their bubble to the Crystal Temple to ask for help from the others, but they struggle with the incline and the soundproofing on the bubble makes it impossible to call for help. Undeterred, Steven tries to go off to his other friends for aid, doubling as an introduction of Connie to several other Beach City residents, rolling the bubble to Big Donut, where Lars makes fun of Steven's date gone wrong, as Sadie fails to smash it with blunt instruments. They then head to the wharf in search of a harpoon gun to pop it, asking Onion to shoot them to safety. Connie shows off an impressive amount of knowledge on the boats there, saying that she spent a long time at beach towns watching the boats rather than talking to people. Onion finally shoots the bubble, only for the harpoon gun to fail to pop anything. They then go to the amusement park as there's plenty of danger there, and Steven plans to have the bubble burst by hitting it with a roller coaster. Connie points out that this plan is bad due to not knowing what comes after the coaster hits them, but Steven ignores the long-term issues to roll in the way, only for them to be battered into the ocean where they sink. Steven tries to calm Connie down once they're at the bottom of the ocean, telling her that the giant worm they see swimming around is only going after red plants and isn't a carnivore. And then the worm is revealed to be the cause of the earthquakes, breaking a hole in the ocean that they sink even deeper into. Now trapped, Connie cries over the fact that they're going to drown or starve before she's ever made a friend, and then Steven shows her the bracelet. He says that she dropped it a year ago at the parade and that he's been waiting to give it back to her since. Once she's cheered up, the bubble finally bursts, and they rise to the surface where the worm starts attacking the two. Steven realizes that the worm is after the glowing bracelet and uses it to lure it through the supports of the pier, which eventually crushes it. The other gyms arrive, where an excited Connie tells them all about their day, though Garnet picks the others up, saying they ought not to mess with Steven's funky flow. Serious Steven. The episode opens on a scene of destruction at the pier, flashing forward 2 weeks later as Steven is brought along on another adventure, in spite of the warnings of Pearl that he needs to focus instead of messing around with his ukulele. They arrive at an old battlefield, strewn with swords and butterflies, where they come across a massive gem temple and enter, looking at the carvings on the walls for a while as Steven messes around with the artifacts, opening up a hole in the ground that they fall down. They're now in a round room with doors on every side and no apparent way out, so Garnet tells Steven he needs to get serious and go with her, while the others stay put, and Steven announces he is now Serious Steven. Steven and Garnet then head into one of the hallways, where they have to go through a series of physical challenges. Steven falls on the glowing floor puzzle and needs to be rescued. He nearly gets crushed by spikes and needs to get rescued, and he passes out when he sees the next trapped room, also needing to be rescued. While passed out, he recalls the spinning teacup incident from the start of the episode. Steven was feeling woozy and leaped out of the ride, landing on Mr. Smiley and breaking the controls as the ride malfunctioned, throwing everybody off of it, and getting Steven banned from all the rides in the future. Steven wakes up at the end of the room, having been saved yet again by Garnet, only to realize that they're back where they started. Pearl and Amethyst are confused as well because they've also noticed that the rooms don't make sense, but Steven remembers the spinning from the teacup rides and suggests that the rooms themselves are moving in circles. Garnet simply punches through the ground and confirms this fact when they see several rotating gems under the surface, and Serious Steven asks Garnet to throw him towards the center to dismantle the trap himself. He grabs the gem and the temple vanishes, with the four reappearing in the field, as Steven picks up his ukulele and declares that he's now Silly Steven again. Tiger Millionaire. The gems return from another mission, with Pearl chastising Amethyst for being too reckless, a lecture she ignores to return to her room. That night, Steven catches her sneaking out and follows, watching as Amethyst enters an underground wrestling league with the persona of the Purple Puma, serving as the event's heel and beating up the other wrestlers. Steven confronts her about this, not to criticize her but in awe as he looks up to the fact that she can go on stage and act however she wants to, rather than being bossed around by Garnet and Pearl like he does. So to experience the same freedom she has, he creates the persona of Tiger Millionaire, knowing it will get the crowd to boo him as well. The Purple Puma accepts him as a partner so she can win a tag team tournament, telling him to sit back while she does all the fighting. But Steven's quick to pick up on the lingo and behavior, pretending to bribe other contestants or using exaggerated rich guy behavior to knock out opponents. The two heels start to get more and more fans, including Lars, who one day asks Steven for an autograph only for Tiger Millionaire to push him away, as he thought he had to stay in character all the time. This reflects the learned behavior of Amethyst. She's okay with being the heel in life as it gives her more freedom not to listen to others when they tell her what to do. but sometimes you do need to put away the heel personality if it involves someone close to you. Steven feels bad about pushing away his biggest fan, but goes to the championship match with his partner the next night anyway, only for the fight to be called off when Pearl and Garnet enter the arena, chastising Amethyst for using her gem powers against humans. They start fighting for a while until Steven grabs the microphone and comes up with an in-character backstory for the Purple Puma, that he just wanted to find a place where he would be accepted and thought wrestling would be that place. The crowd is moved by this speech and turns to cheer for Tiger Millionaire and the Purple Puma as Garnet and Pearl pretend they were trying to end all wrestling, allowing themselves to be defeated. In the end, they win the belts with the help of the other wrestlers, and Lars' faith in wrestling is restored. Steven's Lion. The crystal gems are in the desert on another mission, though Steven's tired and sweaty due to needing water and shelter and such. So they leave him behind while they finish the job, with Steven resting in the shade before he discovers a lion. He's afraid at first, but the lion seems tame and Steven quickly takes to the creature, telling him all about his day and so on. The crystals return from their mission shortly afterwards, carrying with them a pillow gem that Amethyst says she'll bubble later on. Steven has to say goodbye to the lion as they return home, with Pearl warning Amethyst not to be careless with the gem, lest it touch sand and make another castle. Back at the temple, Amethyst still hasn't bubbled the gem, taking a nap instead. And then Steven hears a scratching at the door where he sees the lion has returned. He's happy that this lion came all the way to visit him, playing games with it, although the lion mostly just stands around. This is a lion that closely matches the color scheme of Jones-Qaurtey, a character we've seen very little of, but who I can already tell is going to be one of those characters that the narrative is built around. Her absence itself is a character that we see indirectly through lions and Greg's past and other artifacts. Steven tries to take this lion into town to show it off, though when he attempts to show other people, the lion leaves and Steven looks like a fool. It's interesting that people did believe at first that Beach City has so much other stuff going on that a boy with a magical pink lion is mundane enough not to get a shocked reaction, but not so mundane no one bothers to check. Steven returns home where the lion is once again scratching at the door, this time breaking in to stare at the gem pillow. Steven's frustrated that this lion's so unresponsive, so he takes the pillow and throws it out of the house. It then fuses with the sand on the beach to grow new castles. The others try to stop this expanding castle, but Steven rushes in too, falling down and being rescued by the lion. It becomes clear that the lion was always interested in protecting others from the unbubbled gem, and it uses a sonic voice to break the sand away, clearing a path for Steven to grab the crystal. In the end, Steven prepares to say his goodbyes to the lion again, only for the other gems to decide that there's no harm in keeping a lion as a pet. Arcade Mania. Steven is ruining a stealth mission by wearing a loud coat, though Garnet is able to easily take out the Gem of the Week with a few punches, in spite of also having to rescue him. As a reward for another job well done, Steven offers to take the trio to the arcade for some fun, setting up each of the crystal gems with a game he thinks fits their personality. Pearl, always playing by the rules, gets really into a GTA clone where she follows all the traffic laws and such. Amethyst is introduced to skee-ball, which she immediately begins cheating in upon hearing that there are prizes available. And Garnet is shown a few fighting games, which she destroys by actually trying to punch out the figures in the machines. Eventually, Mr. Smiley discovers that they're wrecking the place up and threatens to kick them out, so Steven, Amethyst, and Pearl exit, leaving Garnet behind because she found an unfortunately named rhythm game. It's a bit of a running joke that the crystal gems struggle to understand human activities and behaviors, despite putting in so much effort to guard humans, the sort of thing that would certainly come back thematically later. The next day, Steven is using his metal detector on the beach to find more quarters when he's attacked by some of the drill gems from the fight at the start of the episode. He rushes back to the temple where the others have been caught off guard due to the fact that Garnet never warned them of an incoming invasion. They run out to go find her, with Steven having the others check the arcade, where they do find her, still dancing to the music. Steven attempts to unplug the machine, though Garnet repowers it herself. He tries beating her in the game to end the winning streak, but she defeats him easily. Finally, Steven realizes that she has been entranced, as her revealed third eye is dizzy and spiraling. So he destroys the game to break her free. Mr. Smiley catches Steven causing this property damage and forces him to sweep the floors to pay him back, as Garnet leads the others in dispatching the drills. Giant Woman. Steven's refereeing a game between Pearl and Amethyst involving checkers and water balloons, but the two of them keep arguing over the results that culminates in them saying that they never form Opal anymore. Steven asks about Opal, and it's revealed that two gems can fuse together to make a stronger version of themselves. Amethyst and Pearl's fusion is called Opal. Steven bombards them with questions about Opal, but they don't answer these until Garnet returns, saying they have a new mission to track down gem beetles. They're split up, with Steven going with the two arguing gems to the Heaven Beetle, as Garnet, who's fireproof, goes below the surface. They go to a large mountain and start climbing, with Steven befriending a goat while trying to come up with the various excuses to see the others fuse, even singing the titular song Giant Woman to urge them on. They ignore this singing though, as the two fusing won't work due to no emergency situations calling for it. Even Steven, falling off of a floating rock, gets rescued by Amethyst using her whip to lower Pearl to catch him. They make it to the top of the mountain where the Heaven Beetle ought to be, only to find an empty, tiny house. While investigating this house, a giant bird swoops down and eats Steven's goat companion, so they take cover where Amethyst and Pearl agree to form Opal together with a dance. But Amethyst's erratic dancing doesn't mesh well with Pearl's ballet, and the fusion fails, and while trying to get them to stop fighting with each other, Steven's eaten by the bird. He awakens inside of the beast's stomach, where he sees that the goat is okay and chewing on the Heaven Beetle. After wresting control of it from the goat, he's pulled out of the bird's stomach by Opal, a giant woman who resembles Lakshmi, who also fuses with Pearl's spear and Amethyst's whip to make a bow that shoots down all the smaller birds flying after them. Opal sings a bit of the song Giant Woman to Steven before they return home, giving Garnet the other beetle who has bubbled safely away. She congratulates Steven on getting the two to work together by saying he'll make a good fusion one day, which Steven's shocked to hear he's capable of doing. Opal herself gets very little characterization outside of a brief fight scene against a swarm of birds, this episode being more about the concept of fusions than the fusions themselves. To fuse, the two need to be on the same wavelength, so to speak. Garnet uses the word harmony to describe fusion. So we see the two unable to fuse after a whole episode of disagreeing with one another, only to put their differences aside once they finally agree on one thing: saving Steven. So many birthdays. While searching through Amethyst's room for the source of a foul smell, Steven comes across an old portrait of the gems, learning that gems are effectively immortal because they don't age as humans do. Steven's takeaway from this conversation is that they've never celebrated a birthday and are thousands of years behind, so he takes it upon himself to throw birthday parties for all of them. First, he tries to teach Amethyst about piñatas, assuming that she'll be the most interested in a tradition where you get to beat something up and get candy as a result. But Amethyst is mostly just confused as to why he wouldn't just give her the candy directly. Then he throws Pearl a party where he dresses as a clown, only to get saved when he tries to fall into a pie for a bit. This only makes Pearl uncomfortable, especially when she fails to understand his jokes, assuming he's just making up lies about her. Finally, he tries to have a kazoo racing day with Garnet, though the others point out that these birthday celebrations might be failing to entertain them because they're too childish. This causes Steven to walk around the town in an existential crisis as he realizes that growing up means leaving the things he loved as a child behind. Then Steven's crystal begins to react to his emotional state, his fear of growing older, and he starts to age physically. He tries to enjoy the things he did as a kid, like games at the arcade, and still does, just telling himself that he's not supposed to enjoy childish things and putting them away as he ages further and further. Steven enters Big Donut where Sadie and Lars don't recognize him, and he's shocked by his reflection in the mirror, deducing that he needs to have a reverse birthday. He staggers to the beach and is carried the rest of the way by Lion, shocking the other gems with his aged appearance. They attempt to recreate the childish birthday antics, Amethyst transforming into a tiny car, Pearl attempting a clown routine, and Garnet just slapping him a bit, all to no success. But once they argue among themselves, Steven tells them to grow up, and he reverts to an adult, slowly transforming back to his childish self as he's reminded of the childish things he's been doing all along. Steven's gem reacts to his emotions, which is why he's able to conjure shields when he's happy with his friends, but he can also produce one when he's trying to save somebody. He himself has to be rescued quite a few times during the show thus far, but from what we, the audience, have seen, it might be useful, albeit not wise, to allow him to keep failing, if only so his sense of self-preservation conjures his powers again. Here, his lack of self-preservation and sense of mortality is doing the opposite, so it is a logical assumption. Lars and the Cool Kids. The crystal gems are at a gulch, watching a moss inside of it slowly devour anything that comes near. They explain that this moss was planted by Jones-Qaurtey years ago because she found it beautiful, though the others are just seeing it as gross and wonder what the appeal is to it. Unable to stop it from gnawing at anything nearby, they simply block the gulch off with a bit of police tape and call the job done. It's interesting how they react to this plant, seeing it as disgusting but not wanting to destroy it outright or lock it away in a bubble like they've done to so much else, due to Jones-Qaurtey's affinity for it. A similar affinity she has for things like Greg and anything on Earth. The crystal gems don't really understand Jones-Qaurtey's personality, but they don't need to understand something to respect it, just leaving it be. Steven leaves this gulch to get some lunch where he sees Lars trying to impress some other kids, though they just walk right by the guy, paying him no attention. Hearing his scheme, Steven intervenes to talk to the cool kids directly, and he convinces them to take him and Lars along for a ride. While riding through town, they learn one of the kids' father is Mayor Dewey, as well as learning about the seemingly incomprehensible preferences of the kids there, claiming things are gross and then liking them, or saying they wanted more affection growing up, only to say the lack of it made them who they are. Lars also keeps flip-flopping on his own personality to try and match the others, but fails to keep up because they don't seem to know either. Steven, on the other hand, remains consistent in his values and is praised for them regardless of what he's actually saying. This group then arrives at Dead Man's Mouth, the gulch from the start of the episode with moths growing inside. They cut through the police tape set up by the gyms and start swimming, though Steven refuses to go in the water and he pushes Lars out of the way. Before Lars can chastise Steven for preventing him from fitting in, the moss overtakes the others and they're soon encased in plant life. Steven remembers something Pearl said about his mother taking the moss up to the cliff nearby and convinces Lars to drive them up there. They struggle to do this because Lars doesn't know how to drive stick, but do eventually break near the top, dragging the mossy teens up the hill but failing to reach the top as they become overwhelmed by the spreading plants. And then the sun rises and the moss begins to bloom into flowers that all blow away, freeing everybody and drawing their attention to Beast City as Steven gives Lars the credit for saving the day. Onion Trade. Steven can't find his ranger guy, part of a complete set of guys, and he asks around to see if anyone else has seen it. Pearl says that he wouldn't lose things as much if he kept his space more organized and didn't leave the window open, and Amethyst compares Steven's room to her own, saying she can always find what she's looking for, assuming she bothers to look. Steven leaves to ask Greg if he's seen Ranger Guy, recalling that Greg first bought him the set a year ago at the beach. Greg remembers that day mostly because they had a delicious funnel cake, rather than the guys he bought his son. He does, however, give Steven a bag of quarters from the car wash to go try to win new guys and complete the collection, so Steven rushes over to the arcade. He attempts to win a new Ranger Guy but only gets 30 Dave guys instead, eventually draining the machine of everything it has. He then sees Onion walking away with a Ranger Guy in his back pocket, following the kid around where he sees him haggling with everyone he meets before sitting at the pier and throwing food into the water, and then his father briefly speaks to him. Steven then offers all of his Dave guys for Onion's Ranger Guy, but Onion keeps turning the offer down, with Steven returning home defeated. Here, he sees Amethyst on the porch, having found Pearl's replicator wand in her room, and she offers it to Steven to haggle with Onion better. Steven at first tries to offer the kid even more copies of Dave Guy, to no success because Onion wants the wand instead. The episode then cuts to Steven on the beach with Ranger Guy, trying to entertain himself but failing to do so. Steven spent the better part of the episode upset that Dave Guy is worthless, and yet he still tries to trade a bunch of worthless guys to a figure with more sentimental value. The value coming from the fact that he got the guy while spending a fun day with his dad. No amount of sitting in front of a gacha machine is going to compare to that, so of course the Dave Guy has no value, and of course the Ranger Guy obtained in a trade won't have sentimental value either. Steven then gets hit by a Dave Guy ball, turning around to see an entire tidal wave of them appearing from Onion, who's mass-producing them. The crystal gems rush over to find the source of this wave of junk, trying to get closer to Onion but being pushed away by the cars he's now replicating at them. Steven swims underneath the surface of the balls, emerging next to Onion, and then noticing his initials on the boots of Ranger Guy, revealing it was his missing one all along. Steven says that the trade is invalid because the figure was stolen, and Garnet smashes the replicator wand, causing the Daves and the cars to disappear. Steven then realizes that Onion only stole the figure in the first place because he was jealous of Steven's relationship to his father, and he forgives the boy. Steven the Sword Fighter. The best way to see the role a character plays in a show's dynamic is to take them out of the show for a while to see what happens. This has been the way the audience is learning about Rose Quartz thus far, and this episode is the way we see this dynamic contribution made by Pearl. The Crystal Gems are watching Lonely Blade 4 together, as Pearl criticizes the depiction of swordplay from the movie, offering instead to show a better display of fighting to Steven that he immediately accepts. Pearl then takes them to a battlefield in the sky where she uses her powers to create a sparring partner named Hollow Pearl. The two proceed to fight as Pearl narrates her techniques. She then offers to teach the basics of sword fighting to Steven, starting off with simple footwork. But Steven grows impatient watching this slow show because he wants to do the boomerang blade technique from his movies, to which Pearl tries to temper his expectations by saying that sword fighting's about patience and waiting for an opening. Then Hollow Pearl stabs her in the back as she finds an opening. Pearl disintegrates into dust and Steven starts to cry, only for Garnet and Amethyst to comfort him by saying that gems can reconstitute once heavily damaged and it only takes some time. But weeks pass and Pearl still hasn't reconstituted herself yet, with Steven getting impatient and trying to spend time with the Hollow Pearl instead. Hollow Pearl doesn't want to do any of the chores around the house that Pearl used to do, only wanting to practice various levels of sparring with anyone nearby. Amethyst and Garnet tell Steven to stop hanging around with a fake Pearl and wait for her to reform, but they don't enforce this because Amethyst has eaten a piece of cloud she got on a mission, and Garnet's trying to stop her from floating away. Steven tries having fun with the Hollow Pearl, but fails to connect with her at all, accidentally telling her to attack a tree as she keeps interpreting his speeches as orders for attack. She even breaks the TV again when she sees the swords from Lonely Blade 5. Steven has enough of this behavior and pushes her, initiating combat mode again. He flees from this battle, throwing various things at her, before recalling the lesson from before about finding an opening. He copies the boomerang blade technique from the movie, and because it isn't a real technique, the Hollow Pearl doesn't have a counter for it. She's destroyed just as Garnet and Amethyst return, with Pearl reforming afterwards. But upon seeing the state of the house and the others, she regrets having left themselves to themselves for so long. Lion 2, the movie. Connie and Steven are watching the trailer for Dogcopter 3 and are excited to go see the movie together. The other Jims wonder why they would want to see a movie about a shape-shifting dog when Amethyst can shapeshift into a dogcopter for them, but Steven insists on going with Connie anyway. As the theater is far away, Steven decides to ride Lion there. Connie's jealous of the fact that Steven has a pet lion and lives with magical gems, and wonders why he chooses to hang out with her, especially because she has a boring life with the coolest thing about her being the occasional tennis lesson. Steven then rides around on Lion, something Connie's unsure about doing because he doesn't have any training with lions, to which Steven says he lacks training as well, and then Lion takes a turn towards the ocean, using his sonic voice to open a portal. The three of them then arrive inside of a gem armory with a pedestal in the middle. Connie feels like she doesn't belong in there, but Steven explores around anyway, eventually getting his hand stuck on the pedestal, where he keeps accidentally requesting swords and armor and the like with his conversations, the armory responding to him even though he doesn't realize this. When Steven decides it's time to go watching some explosions in the movie, the armory produces a robot that begins launching explosions at the duo, chasing them around the room. Steven and Connie get on Lion to flee, exiting through a portal back to the movie theater. Once here, Connie begins to question why Steven wants to hang out with her and watch movies when he can visit secret armories and ride lions and hang out with the crystal gems. But Steven doesn't seem to understand why he can't enjoy these things and spend time with Connie and also see normal movies and so on. The robot from before returns, threatening Steven and Connie once more. So Lion produces a sword from his head and gives it to Steven, though after the events of last episode, he's not very confident with the sword. So Connie grabs his arms and uses what she learned in her tennis lesson to deflect the missiles, eventually serving one back at the robot, which explodes. The two then join Lion in the movie theater to watch Dogcopter 3 together. Beach Party. The crystal gems are struggling to fight against a giant wind pufferfish, trying to distract it so Garnet can come in for a finishing blow, only for her to get pushed back into a storefront. Amethyst simply bats the pufferfish away further into the ocean, saying they can just deal with the gem later. They head out to check on Garnet, seeing her laying on the front of Fish Stew Pizza, which has been destroyed. She's okay though, and the crystal gems head back to the temple But the owner of this store, Kofi Pizza, is upset that they destroyed his restaurant and then left. Steven is distraught about this, trying to get the others to care that they're causing property damage, as they're supposed to be protecting Earth, something he doesn't think they can do if they're not also protecting its people. This calls back to earlier episodes, where the Crystal Gems have struggled to understand human traditions and behaviors, all in spite of the fact that they've all lived here for hundreds of years. The Pizza family, that's the real last name, bans the Crystal Gems from the restaurant, and the Crystal Gems don't seem to care. So to remind them of the importance of community, Steven invites the Gems and the Pizzas to a beach party to mend the feud between them. He does this with a barbecue and a bit of beach volleyball, splitting the teams up to force people to work together, though each player starts cheating in some way, be it through the use of gem powers or messing with the net. This only makes the two groups argue even more, and then the pufferfish returns, attacking the beach party. Nanafua Pizza decides to take charge, using the same strategy from the start of the episode to distract the pufferfish as Garnet and Amethyst superheat the sand into sharpened glass, all while the others use the net to push the gem into the spikes. This gem explodes and the day is saved, with the Pizzas unbanning the gems from their establishment, although Pearl still isn't sure what they were banned from in the first place. Rose's room. Steven eats several cans of creamed corn to find mini golf coupons attached, hoping to take the Crystal Gems out golfing, but they're busy with the mission and they ignore him. So he passes the time by playing a golf video game, unlocking the secret ending, but not being able to watch the cutscene because the Gems have returned and are lecturing him about what they found, accidentally breaking his TV with a sound wave in the process. Steven gets angry and wishes for a place where he can be alone, and then his gem begins to glow, responding to the door which he then opens to enter Rose's room. Once inside, Steven wonders how Rose slept without a bed, only for a bed to appear. He then starts asking for more and more things appearing in front of him before wishing for a donut, only to learn that the food the room conjures cannot actually be eaten. Steven then wishes for a door out of the room so he can eat something real, and he's taken to the outside of Big Donut. But Lars and Sadie are acting strangely, standing still and speaking in unison while messing up his order. Steven leaves, where he runs by several other citizens of Beach City, all of whom are acting equally strange and only partially responsive. This serves as a sort of recap of several of the events that have happened thus far. The only parts of Beach City Steven sees are parts that were prominent in previous episodes, even quoting lines they spoke in those episodes, and very little else. Finally, Steven encounters Greg, who's behaving more normal than anyone else in Beach City. Steven relaxes a bit, trying to explain what's going on to his father, though he just gets weird sayings and unrelated platitudes. Steven then realizes he's still inside of the room because he can't eat one of the donuts, and the entire space starts to fall apart chunk by chunk. He watches Beach City disappear before falling through the ground, where he is then asked by the room what he wants. Steven wishes to go back to the Gems, and he's pushed out of the room, checking to see if they're real before feeling thankful they are. In the end, the Crystal Gems all play mini-golf, just like Steven wanted. Coach Steven. While at a malfunctioning Crystal Gem communications hub, the Gems are trying to figure out a way to take it out before it can cause more damage, eventually resolving to simply break it. So Garnet fuses with Amethyst against Pearl's wishes to form Sugarlight, and Pearl refuses to let Steven watch the fusion dance, eventually leaving the area once the debris from Sugarlight's violent destruction of the pillars injures him. Steven returns to Beach City eager to show off his scars from the battle, but Lars and Sadie tease him when his bandages reveal a tiny scrape on his forehead. After seeing Lars struggle to open up a jar, he decides that all three of them need to strengthen up to be more like Sugarlight, and he has Greg build them a makeshift gym on the beach. Steven grabs a megaphone and begins coaching the others on how to be stronger, and as Pearl watches them all pursuing strength, she sings a song about strong in the real way, about how she would rather Steven not focus on power but a different kind of strength. Pearl's unsure about the Sugarlight transformation despite Garnet's reassurances, as she doesn't think such a powerful gym has the self-control not to be violent. So when she sees Steven trying to get buff, she worries that some of that behavior is going to rub off on him, that he might idolize the wrong people for the wrong reasons. These reasons are things natural to Sugarlight, as they're both features that Garnet and Amethyst both have. Garnet is strong and decisive. Amethyst is impulsive but confident. Combining these traits together makes a personality so overpowering, both physically and otherwise, that it takes over the minds of the Gems that make up the fusion. They both mention they lost control of themselves at the end of the episode. The next day, Steven is too sore from his workout to move when Sugarlight returns, having had to walk home after destroying the warp pads. They are angry about having to do this, and they take this anger out on Pearl and the others, with Pearl trying to hold off Sugarlight herself to no success. So Steven picks up the megaphone again and starts encouraging Pearl to be stronger in the real way, just like her song, and she uses her head to lure the rampaging fusion to the cliff, where she hits the rocks beneath their feet to knock them to the ground, crushed by her own falling weapon. Amethyst and Garnet apologize for losing control, as Pearl is excited about the rush she feels from battle. Joking victim. Amethyst pranks Steven with spicy fire salt that makes him run to Big Donut to cool off. He makes a mess that Lars slips in, and he asks Sadie, who he calls his player 2, to clean it up because his back is too injured to do it himself. Sadie complains that she's always the one who has to clean up Steven's messes, but does it anyway. Lars then says he's in too much pain to work, so Sadie gives him the day off, while Steven volunteers to take over the position. He watches an instructional safety video, learning that Mr. Smiley used to be an R&B singer, and begins to work a shift. He enjoys this work so much that he asks Sadie to fire Lars so he can work there full time, though Sadie turns this down, saying that she believes Lars is a good person deep down, citing a night where she stayed up with him after waiting in line for a video game. So to cheer up Lars while he's sick at home, they decide to bring him a few presents of donuts, though they see Lars and his cool kid friends hanging out while Lars is bragging about how he fooled Sadie by faking an injury. Sadie runs off crying because she realizes how little he respected her, not only to take advantage of her kindness, but to brag about it afterwards. Sadie's always had feelings for Lars, and as a result, thinks of him as a better person than he is. She is willing to overlook his flaws as misunderstandings about his real personality, but to see him bragging about these flaws later means that they're not misunderstood but flagrant. Steven then gets the idea that to get even with Lars, he'll pour some fire salt on a donut and give it to him, talking Sadie into the idea after Lars returns, still faking his injury. Lars eats the spicy donut and begins to breathe fire, which Steven finds funny, though Sadie thinks they might have gone too far and follows him around with a fire extinguisher. Steven chases after him, finding Amethyst nearby and telling her about the fire salt he used, which Lars overhears, trying to attack Steven for burning his mouth. But Sadie intervenes and said that it was her idea, taking responsibility for the prank, but justifying it by saying she was upset over Lars taking advantage of her, not only by faking his injury, but throughout their entire lives. Steven uses the opportunity to use the choking techniques he learned from the employee training video to get the donut out of Lars's throat, and Lars apologizes to Sadie, with the two making up. Steven and the Stevens. The crystal gems are searching for an hourglass in the Sea Shrine, though Amethyst grabs the wrong one and the shrine starts to collapse. Steven grabs one he thought looked nice before they all leave, arriving back at the temple with the mission failed. Steven then leaves to go to the Beach-a-Palooza, a concert he and his dad are supposed to play together. But while recruiting his father, he learns Greg is stuck at work due to an oversized boat being stuck in the car wash. Steven wishes he could go back in time to stop the boat from getting stuck so his dad can play in the band, and the hourglass he took takes him to the past, where he gets to warn his father and the boat doesn't get stuck. Instead, the car towing it hits a power line and burns the car wash down. So Steven goes back in time again to stop himself from stopping the boat, saddened that his father will miss the concert, but getting the idea to form a band with his alternate selves. They go back one more time to make 4 Stevens, forming Steven and the Stevens out of the quad. To tell themselves apart, they give each Steven a number and a personality, telling them to be either smart, funny, sensitive, or handsome. But the Stevens start to question how, if they're all the same person, they can be more of one trait than any of the others. The lead Steven tries to force them into their roles, but they only take this as a sign that Steven doesn't think that Steven, or Steven are handsome at all. Feeling insulted and frustrated, Steven gets some fresh air while pondering what it means if he finds himself annoying. And then he notices the other 3 Stevens have made a new band, with Amethyst drumming, that he's not a part of. To get the band back in order, Steven goes back in time to stop Steven from starting Steven and the Stevens, but Steven, and Steven also go back to stop Steven from stopping Steven. Steven goes further back to other Stevens of the past, pursued by more Stevens, until arriving at the beginning where Steven first picked up the hourglass. Dozens of himself all appear with him, each one fighting all the others, when the lead Steven tells him not to fight himself anymore, and that he has to accept not only the things he dislikes about himself, but dislikes about the rest of the world so he isn't so overwhelmed. Steven smashes the hourglass, and all the other Stevens turn to dust while the sea shrine collapses again. In the end, Steven and the Crystal Gems perform at the Beach-a-Palooza, singing a song about how traumatized he is after watching himself die. Monster Buddies. The Crystal Gems are in a snowy mountain fighting a monster with one attack taking off its arm. Steven winces at the sight of the monster being injured, but Garnet quickly dispatches it with a punch, powerful enough to make the roof of the cavern start to collapse. They need to get Steven out of there quickly, so Garnet bubbles him and sends him back to the lava room in the temple with all of the other bubbled gems. Steven then struggles a bit before escaping this bubble, and as he is falling, he also frees the centipedal from the first episode. Steven realizes that this gem isn't attacking him, and he tries to befriend it, interrupted by the returning Crystal Gems, who try to protect Steven until he steps in to defend his new pet. They agree to give Steven a chance to raise and reform this monster, chaining it to a rock outside the temple and waiting with their weapons raised. Steven thinks that the weapons are scaring the creature, so he tells the others to stay inside as he talks to it, luring the centipedal with chips closer until it seems to be tame. Steven is then attacked by a seagull, who's also after the chips, when his pet spits acid at it, defending him. He shows this new acid trick to the other Crystal Gems and suggests that his new pet will be useful when they return to the ice caverns and clearing the way to get closer to the artifact. They are hesitant to believe that this centipedal is tame enough for this, as its acid spit keeps melting other things too, but Steven and his gem friend are useful in making it deeper into the caverns until they arrive at the room with the shooting star. Garnet equips her gloves as the star is too hot to touch for even a gem, and the creature gets scared at the sight of her weapon, spraying acid everywhere and causing the ceiling to begin collapsing. Steven once again tries to stop the others from fighting it, hugging the gem tightly in spite of being burned by its acid as he does so, and it starts calming down, until a stalactite falls down, nearly crushing Steven until it dives in the way to save him. Steven laments that his new companion is crushed and manages to bubble it himself, which impresses the other gems on top of them already being impressed by the extent to which he was able to tame it. It's revealed that Jones-Qaurtey also used to try to tame corrupted gems herself, but failed to do so many times in the past. That Steven would do so himself mirrors Jones-Qaurtey's attempts, especially as her attempts were failures that she kept doing anyway. Steven knew that the monster was dangerous, he had fought it in the past, and he was being burned by it, but kept trying to protect it anyway, even standing in front of his friends to give it a second and third and a fourth chance and so on. Much in the way that Jones-Qaurtey had an affinity for the things nobody else saw appeal in, Steven is finding himself intervening on the behalf of what other people consider to be monsters. He is his mother's son, after all. An Indirect Kiss. Steven and Connie are having a picnic at the top of the cliff, with Connie noticing that Steven's feeling bad about something. She tries to start a conversation, asking him about the new addition of a fence around this cliff, and he tells her the story about how Amethyst was messing around at the top of it when she accidentally fell off, while taunting Steven by saying she wouldn't. Amethyst appears unharmed at first, but when Pearl inspects her gem, she sees that there's a small crack in the front, causing Amethyst to deform in weird ways like an oversized eye. So Pearl declares that they will build a fence around the cliff so no one will ever fall off again, and the story ends. Connie wants to know what happened to Amethyst's cracked gem though, so Steven continues the story on the condition that he gets to wear her glasses while she gets his juice box in the exchange. The Crystal Gems tell Steven that Jones-Qaurtey had healing tears that could repair broken gems, and because Steven has his mother's gem, he ought to be able to heal Amethyst too. But he tries to make himself cry and fails, so they go to Rose's fountain instead, where there should be a spring that can cure these wounds. This spring is overrun by thorny bushes though, and they can't access it, so Garnet blasts away to the fountain, only to find it's dried up. While Garnet and Pearl leave to find the water's source, they leave Steven and Amethyst together. Amethyst's condition is getting worse, and Steven's attempts to make himself cry by using pain don't work because the thorns start growing sentient and attacking. He takes cover inside the fountain, where he starts to cry over the fact that he's messed everything up and can't even use his mother's magic to be useful. Steven recognizes that sitting in his mother's old spring and being surrounded by her garden beneath an image of her is supposed to be an emotional moment, but he finds himself totally unable to feel anything in this place because he never knew his mother, so it's just some random garden. He does, however, feel regret that he doesn't feel anything, and this causes him to start crying. His tears don't cure Amethyst's gem, but the fountain does activate, with healing water flooding over them and fixing her up as the roses surrounding the duo bloom. Steven thinks he's saved the day, but Garnet and Pearl reveal they simply undid a clog a ways off, and he never had any real powers. This reveal is why Steven is sad in the present, as he's concerned he can never go along with the crystal gems on any of their missions, as well as the fact that the power he inherited from his mother doesn't exist in him, so he has no real connection to her. But Connie's feeling a headache, realizing that her glasses are causing it as she no longer needs them. This causes Steven to deduce that it was his leftover spit on the juice box that contains healing powers, and he celebrates his newly discovered healing spit. Mirror Gym. Steven learns about school from Connie, specifically about summer vacation, which means he doesn't have to go to school. He asks Pearl to set up a school for him. Her first attempts fails, but when she hears that Steven just wanted to learn, she gives him a gym mirror that can be used to relive any moment from gym history. They try asking it a few questions, but the mirror stays blank, with Pearl assuming it doesn't work. Thinking this means Steven is now on summer vacation, he heads outside to go hang out with his friends, where he bumps into Lars, who tells him off. Lars and Sadie discuss their summer plans as Steven heads out to find more adventures, nearly getting run over by Mayor Dewey's truck before the mirror tells him to watch out by using Lars's words. Steven realizes that the mirror can communicate by playing back anything it's heard, and he uses his knowledge to teach the mirror a few jokes that it repeats during a speech by the mayor. Steven is excited to show off the mirror's sentience to the other gyms, but the mirror repeatedly tells Steven not to tell them, and to keep the fact that it can communicate a secret. But Steven's certain that they'll be nice to the mirror, and he takes it back to the temple anyway. As the mirror predicted, the crystal gems are horrified at the thought that the mirror is communicating rather than following orders, eventually seeing Steven talking to it, where they decide it must be destroyed. Steven attempts to protect the mirror from the others, accidentally knocking off Garnet's glasses and realizing she's furious, so he flees the temple, running to the beach. Here, the mirror pleads with Steven to protect it, using pieces of sentences from the episode to tell him it needs to be freed, then showing Steven ripping the gem out of it. Steven does this as a rune forms at his feet, and the gem transforms into the shape of a woman. This woman introduces herself as Lapis Lazuli, and she implies that it's shocking Steven would save her, considering he's a crystal gem. The others arrive, weapons readied, and Lapis Lazuli asks Steven to run away with her. Steven defends her from the others but refuses to go with her, so Lapis creates a wave and runs into the ocean, leaving the others behind. Ocean Gem. Steven is in trouble with the crystal gems after the events of the previous episode, but he doesn't get time to ponder this as Greg rushes in, concerned about the fact that the ocean is gone. Steven packs his things to go bring the ocean back, as he considers it his fault it's gone in the first place for freeing Lapis Lazuli. Connie, Greg, Lion, and the rest of the gems agree to join him, and they set out on a summer road trip to find all the water. As they're driving, Steven laments that the gems are fighting other gems, but Pearl informs him that all the monsters they've been fighting thus far are gems, just corrupted ones who have to be controlled for their own good. They find a massive pillar of water in the middle of the dried-up ocean bed, and Steven approaches, with Lapis Lazuli projecting herself onto the side of it to tell him to leave her alone. Steven ignores this and gets attacked by his reflection, as the rest of the crystal gems are reflected out of the water as well. They fight themselves, getting split up and outmatched by their own power sets, combined with the ability to transform into a liquid, and Steven and Connie are picked up and nearly drowned, save for Greg's intervention. Seeing how hurt everybody is, Steven declares he wants the fighting to stop, and he manifests a shield that shoots out a shockwave that dispels Lapis's power. He then enters the stream of water, getting carried up to the top where he finally meets Lapis looking up at the stars. She says she just wants to go home but can't because her gem is shattered and her powers are too weak. Steven offers to use his healing spit to cure her cracked gem, which causes Lapis Lazuli's eyes to return to normal as she sprouts 2 wings of water, finally able to fly off. The water pillar collapses back into the oceans, with Lion portaling him to safety near the van, and they all manage to return home inside one of Steven's bubbles. The people of Beach City are celebrating the return of the water and thus their livelihoods, when the other gems have an aside conversation. They realize that one of the gems has managed to leave Earth, and they're unsure what is going to happen next. The dynamics set up by the first season thus far are interesting in a few different ways. Firstly, and I'm unsure where else to include this observation, it's so common for a group of heroes in a fictional setting to be 3 or 4 guys with a token female character, to the point that the inverse is a bit refreshing. Not so much given another decade since to normalize that cartoons aren't just toy commercials for little boys, but at the time this was likely more groundbreaking. Next is that we assume that the crystal gems are the good guys because we get their perspective, but so many of the good things Steven tries to do get shut down by their efforts. This is anything from trying to heal corrupted gems instead of fighting them, to recognizing when somebody is distressed and trying to help them out even though he doesn't know the full story. And while it's implied that there is far more to the story than Steven is led on about, it's better to judge his actions based on what he sees instead of the things that he doesn't.